Okay, let's wrap up chapter 6 by illustrating the 4 different employment decision models that we could see in our labor markets. And I want to begin by drawing the completely perfect competitive market. That is, both labor and product markets would be competitive. We do this by first drawing our axes. And we know that we're going to have on the horizontal axis, we're going to have the quantity of labor. And then on the vertical axis, we're going to have the wage. In a perfectly competitive labor market, the supply curve is going to be a horizontal line. And again, this is what the firm sees, right? Because they're the one making the employment decision. The supply curve is going to be equal to the marginal wage cost curve, which is going to be equal to the wage at which workers will work. And that's all going to align at the market wage. I'll put W0. The demand curve for labor in a market that is perfectly competitive in its product would be downward sloping. And it would look like this. The demand curve would be equal to the marginal revenue product curve, and that would be equal to the value of marginal product. The supply curve comes from having a perfectly competitive labor market. The demand curve comes from having a perfectly competitive product market. This is a firm that is a wage taker in the labor market and a price taker in the product market. Firms use marginal revenue product and marginal wage cost to make the employment decision. That is, they will employ to the intersection of these two. This is the firm's perspective on supply. This is the firm's perspective on demand. They will therefore employ at Q firm. That will be the profit maximizing level of output. Of course, now we need to look at society's perspective. Society doesn't look at the supply and demand curve using these metrics. Society uses these metrics. So society is going to want to continue to employ to where the wage equals the value of marginal product. Of course, it's the same here, so we can put society. This market that is perfectly competitive in both labor and product results in an employment decision that is not only profit maximizing for the firm, but efficiency maximizing for society. Let's go on to another example. Let's now make our market slightly imperfect. Same axes. We're going to have quantity of labor here and the wage here. And now we will consider perfect competition in the labor market, but imperfect competition in the product market. And one thing I like to do is reference this initial graph that we built, because this is perfect competition in both the labor and the product market. So it's a good benchmark for building these other ones, which means if we're going to maintain perfect competition in the labor market, then we're going to keep the supply side the same. So we're going to go ahead and draw that as identical. Wage is the market wage. They take that. That's the firm's supply curve, which is the firm's marginal wage cost curve, which is the wage that the workers will supply their labor at. So identical. Perfect competition in the labor market. But in this example, we're going to have imperfect competition in the product market. So this is a firm that will not be able to sell all of its output at the market determined price. And what that means is that their price maker for their product, so they can charge a higher price and they'll sell less, but they'll still sell the product. Or they can charge a lower price and they'll gain some customers. They're a price maker. In that case, it's going to create a divergence on the demand side. So we're going to see, unlike the perfectly competitive product market, we're going to see the demand curve slope downward. But the demand curve that the firm sees, which is going to be its marginal revenue product curve, that demand curve is going to be different than the demand curve that society sees. And that's actually going to be higher. So you're going to have demand society equals value of marginal product. So notice the difference. If we have a firm that is producing a product in a uncompetitive, imperfectly competitive product market, then the value of marginal product, society's perspective on the labor demand curve, will be higher than the marginal revenue product, which is the firm's perspective on the labor demand curve. Now let's do our maximization. Well, the firm will always use marginal revenue product, and it will find where that equates with marginal cost, which is right here. So this will be the labor employment decision for the firm. But society will use the value of marginal product and the wage as their criteria. So they will go all the way to where those curves intersect. And so what we end up with is quantity for society. Now, of course, this creates a problem. We have an underemployment of resources, inefficiency. The firm is profit maximizing here, but society would be efficiency maximizing here. This is an example of a market for labor that is underemploying workers. Okay, now let's consider the opposite of this. And to do this, I'm going to go ahead and keep my perfect competition model up here and rebuild below it, because again, this is a good benchmark for our studies. What I'm going to do here is again draw my axes, quantity of labor, wages, and I want to show imperfect, let me adjust this here, a little better. Okay. I want to show not imperfect competition on the demand side for labor, which would be imperfect competition in the product market. I want to show imperfect competition on the supply side, which is imperfect competition in the labor market. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and draw our demand curve the same. Demand equals marginal revenue product, which equals value of marginal product. But in this example, I want to show that the supply side is divergent. So I'm going to draw my upward sloping supply curve for society, which is going to be essentially the supply curve society sees, and that's going to be equal to the wage. But recall, I'm then going to draw an upward sloping supply curve that the firm sees. It's always higher, and that's the firm's marginal wage cost. So the firm sees a wage to get labor as higher than what society sees as a wage it would take to get people to work. Regardless, we now have our complete model. Again, this is showing imperfectly competitive labor markets and perfectly competitive product markets. All right. The firm looks at marginal revenue product and compares it to the marginal wage cost. So they're going to choose this as Q firm. That's profit maximizing. Society looks at the value of marginal product and the wage. So society is going to choose right here. Quantity society. Well, what do you know? We get the same problem. We have an underemployment of resources. And that means we have less workers being hired based on profit maximization than society would see as efficiency maximizing. So we get a market failure, effectively, and an inefficient outcome. Lastly, let's go ahead and imagine imperfect competition in both our markets. Quantity of labor on the horizontal, wage on the vertical. Now, because we're going from the original model here of perfect competition in product and labor markets to imperfect competition in both, we're just going to go from one extreme to the other. Okay? On the demand side, we're going to see a divergence in the demand curves. So we're going to see the demand that society sees equal to the value of marginal product, and the demand that the firm sees equal to marginal revenue product. On the supply side, we're going to see a divergence as well. Let's see this. The supply that society sees is equal to the wage, and the supply that the firm sees is equal to the marginal wage cost. So again, one extreme to the other. We use the same process. The firm is going to profit maximize by equating the marginal revenue product with the marginal wage cost. That's here, that's going to be right here. Okay? So they're going to choose Q firm. Society is going to efficiency maximize, or want to efficiency maximize, by equating the value of marginal product with the wage. So they're going to look at this curve and this one and choose right here. Same outcome as we got in the other imperfectly competitive market models. We get a under-allocation of labor. Society wants this amount of labor employed based on efficiency. The firm chooses this amount of labor. So an underemployment of labor and the inefficiency that results from that.